welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today I have an unusual guest. We are going to reach back in history and talk to General Benjamin Butler about the historic contraband decision. Welcome, General Butler.
I'm very pleased to be here.
And you have been here in Hampton, it's 1860, boy, I got to jump way back, 1861. You've been at Fortress Monroe just a short amount of time.
That is correct. I came to command here at Fortress Monroe in May of 1861. This is right at the beginning of the War of the Rebellion, the Civil War, as you call it. And Virginia had only just seceded from the Union. And
an unusual thing happened to you in that three brave enslaved people who were building Confederate, or as you would call them, rebellion, forces in Norfolk escaped and got a boat and rowed across to Fortress Monroe. And tell us how you interpreted that act.
That is exactly correct. 2 days after I arrived, I was informed of my aide that three black men had appeared at the gate of the fort the previous evening, begging to be let in. Well, I interviewed them that next morning, found out that, as you said, they had been put to work by their master building fortifications over at Sewell's Point. Fortifications that would hold cannon pointed at me. You can imagine how I felt about that.
Right, very close.
Very good. So, useful military information, but now these three men are here. What am I going to do about them?
What are you going to do about them?
Well, I had very little time to think about it because that very day a Virginia militia major, John Carey, came to the fort under flag of truce, demanding that the three men be returned to their master.
But the law at this point says that they are fugitive. The law of the United States.
That is correct.
That they are fugitives and that they are property.
That is correct. Fortunately, though, before my military career began, I was a lawyer up in Massachusetts, and a pretty good one, if I say so myself. And I had a lawyer's response for the gentleman. I said that, first of all, yes, you are correctly quoting the laws of the United States, but Virginia now claims she is no longer part of the United States, and I am under no constitutional obligation to a foreign country, which Virginia now claims to be, and I intend to take her at her word as far as that is concerned. As for the matter of returning the man's property, well, you do refer to them as property, and the rules of war say that I am entitled to seize enemy property that is being used against me in the war, as these three men were, and therefore I am going to hold them and not return them, under the doctrine that they are contraband of war.
Contraband of war?
Yes.
This is a brave declaration, because at this point, fairly early in the war, I don't think the president has come out here and said anything about slaves being allowed to be.
Actually, he has said something, that his administration believes that it has no power to interfere with slavery in the states where it is legal.
So in other words, he's not exactly giving you the direction that you took here,
I have no idea whether
General.
the War Department is going to approve what I did, but then a remarkable thing happened. Only 2 days later, 7 other enslaved runaways appeared at the fort, asking to be let in. And the day after that, 40 more. Somehow word of what I had done and gotten around. Well, to make the story short, the War Department did back me up, saying I could take in these so-called contrabands, and that started a flood of them. Hundreds, then thousands of people fleeing from their bondage, fleeing for the protection of the United States Army at Fort Monroe, which they began to call the Freedom Fort. And also, everywhere our federal armies marched in the South, other enslaved people did the same. Thousands upon thousands of these so-called contrabands. It was the beginning of the end of the institution of slavery. And it happened at Fort Monroe.
Was that your intention, General? Did you foresee what would happen?
Not at first. My first intention, of course, was to deprive the enemy of some of its resources. But then I'd put these men to work at the fort, and I saw how hard they worked, and how dedicated they were, and how cheerful they were despite all they had gone through. And I began to think more about them, and I wrote later that summer to the War Department. I said, have these people, by the actions of war and by their own actions, now achieved the status of being what we hold ourselves to be, children of God? Are they now not simply property, but men and women? And my own thinking began to turn that way.
Interesting. And who were these first three men who started this movement, really?
Oh, they were James Townsend, Frank Baker, and Shepard Mallory. And they had been enslaved at a farm in what was then Elizabeth City County. And as I said, they were put to work for the Confederates sent there by the master.
So what was their status after your decision? All these, the first three and all the thousands who followed, were they legally free? Were they...
Well, not totally free. As I said, I had the doctrine that they were contrabands, which is what made their taking acceptable that early in the war. And fortunately, the federal government, step by step, moving around, they passed a Confiscation Act legalizing the taking in of all these runaways. And eventually after that, they formed the United States Colored Troops so that black men who wished to join us in the struggle could join up and fight with us. And then, of course, 2 years later came Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, declaring slaves free in areas that were still in rebellion. And finally, after that, the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery, all of which began at Fort Monroe.
A very long road, yet a very important one at Fort Monroe. And I will say, at this point, General, if you're ready to change personas.
I am at your service.
And become Tony Gabriele just a little bit. You are involved in the Contraband Historical Society.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
And you all are planning a very big, you do an annual celebration anyway of the contraband decision and the many contrabands who accepted that title and settled Hampton. I mean, in so many ways, the Confederates were mostly gone by now. There was Fort Monroe, which was active and bustling, and there was a large, or a couple large encampments of people.
Large contraband camps.
And they founded churches, and they began stores and operations and life, and really helped bring Hampton back.
That is true, Cyril. The churches in Hampton and the black communities in Hampton owe their origin to those original contrabands. And that is the reason why in the middle of this southern town you have a Lincoln Street and a Union Street, names which they gave them.
Right, at that time. So what are the plans for this year's celebration, Tony?
All right. Well, as you said, we hold annual living history programs in partnership with the National Park Service, but we're doing big things this year. But of course, as everyone knows, it is the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first African Americans. And so far, we are having a big celebration tying in with all of those observances. So this is on Saturday, May the 4th. The event will begin with a procession into the fort, starting on Harrison Street, going past in front of the Catholic Church and through Cannon Park and past the YMCA and over to the moat and through the main gate and onto the parade field. This will be a procession by heritage groups and community representatives, and that will be emblematic of the fleeing to sanctuary of all these enslaved people during the Civil War. That will be at 11 a.m. At noon on the parade field. There will be a stage set up, and we are going to have performances by some heritage musical groups. The USCT Singers will be there, a group, I'm so sorry. I can't think of the name. I apologize to them. We're not thinking the name right now. There will be a featured speaker, Tulani Davis, who is a noted playwright and author and scholar, and also a direct descendant of one of the leaders of the early contrabands, William Roscoe Davis.
I know that name from the Hampton Heroes list,
That's right.
I think.
He was one of the leaders of the first contrabands, also known to history for being the lighthouse keeper of the Old Point Comfort Lighthouse. She will be the featured speaker, and that portion of the ceremony will conclude with a presentation of excerpts from a musical drama that was written by Jerry Hollins. Jerry Hollins was the founder of the Contraband Historical Society, a contraband descendant herself, and did so much work to make this story known at a time when it had been largely forgotten to history.
I think that's so interesting, and she was so amazing, and I only knew her toward the end. She was also very, very active in helping to make Fort Monroe a national monument. She was truly one of the leaders and speakers, and she helped lead that charge because, again, Fort Monroe the first place that Africans arrived in what was then the British colonies, and the first place that they began to become free. And obviously they didn't right away. It was still a long journey, but it was a far cry from what they escaped from. And so recognizing that at Fort Monroe, and it does coincide with the 400th anniversary, even though it's not the same story, it's a continuation of the story.
Sort of bookends that. The arrival of the first African Americans, which eventually led to the beginning of slavery in this country, and the event at the same spot that was the beginning of the end of the institution of slavery. Now, as you know, Ms. Hollins was an accomplished singer and musician. She wrote this musical drama about what had happened to her forebears, her ancestors at that time in 1861, and we were presenting several musical numbers from that tied together with a narration that gives some of the story.
Now, I had heard that was almost lost. Someone recovered and found that.
Yes, what was lost was most of the musical score, the actual sheet music, which we're trying to piece back together in the hopes that someday the entire thing can be presented.
Wow.
And there's one more portion of our event. And then at 2 p.m., we are going to have a performance by Steve Wilson. Steve Wilson is an acclaimed multi-instrumentalist, primarily a jazz musician.
Okay.
He will be leading a quartet that will also be on the stage at the parade ground beginning at 2 p.m. He's very well regarded in music circles. He has performed with the Philharmonic Jazz Orchestra and also performed as a sideman with such jazz greats as Lionel Hampton and Chick Corea. So that's something that a lot of people will want to come out and listen to as well.
Interesting, and of course, jazz, you know, a uniquely American music sound that comes directly out of the African American experience.
Although he does not perform only jazz, but that is mainly what he's known for.
Okay. Well, this sounds like a huge, huge day, Tony.
It has been a huge effort to put together for a very small group. We, of course, are partnering with the National Park Service, which has given us a great deal of assistance and support. We've also, of course, had assistance from the Fort Monroe Authority and some very fine assistance from the Hampton Convention and Visitor Bureau.
Wonderful. And I hope people do come out and people even come to town for this, because I think this is recognizing, you know, an important story to Hampton and to the nation as a whole. It is part of what we should be learning in school, and I hope we are. I certainly didn't learn it when I was in school.
Can you indulge me with one thing?
Of course.
I want to look up the name of that other group is performing, because I surely do not wish to leave them out, and they are the Music Mosaic.
Music Mosaic. Okay.
And I think they're people who are formed possibly with the assistance of the Parks Recreation Department here.
Okay, so Tony, how many of you are active volunteers and involved in the Contraband Historical Society?
Okay, well, of course, the Contraband Historical Society itself is a fairly small group. The one part of the presentation that we are putting together ourselves is the excerpts from Jerry Holland's musical. Then there's other performers which we have engaged. As I said, Music Mosaic and the USCT Singers. Oh, I forgot one more very important thing, which is the historic reenactors who are going to be present for the event. We are going to have in the procession and also on the grounds the Buffalo Riders, who are a group of mounted reenactors who portray the African-American soldiers and cowboys of the Old West in the period surrounding the Civil War. And also the Park Service has arranged to have 3 Civil War military reenactment groups present for people to see and interact with as well.
Wow, okay. And will you be portraying General Butler at some point?
Yes, I will be there portraying him in the Jerry Hollins excerpts.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing this, and you will have several other people involved in this, being the contrabands and reenacting Jerry's, I guess, particular heritage, but the heritage of many people in Hampton.
Yes, indeed. Okay. And I said, and of course, I hope we mentioned that this event is completely free to the public, completely free. If people want to stay for the whole thing, I hope they will bring their picnic lunches and their lawn chairs and settle in for a full afternoon of it.
That'd be great. And I bet you Ouzelfinch will have a food truck, so there'll be other opportunities there as well. Well, thank you so much, Tony and General Butler. I appreciate you coming by.
I am most welcome. Hope to see you on May the 4th.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching. I hope this is just one of the many, many special events Hampton and Fort Monroe and the state have planned this year to recognize this 400th anniversary of the arrival of Africans and to celebrate the culture and contributions they made to Hampton, to the nation, and to really building our country. Thank you for watching.